Houston didn't lose this game because it was physically dominated. Houston lost because it insisted on playing a style of football that the opposing defense was begging to face. This is not a video about a quarterback collapsing. It's not a video about an offensive line being humiliated. And it's not a video about isolated turnovers. This is a video about structure, about how in the playoffs you can move the ball and still spend the entire game playing at a disadvantage. Because there is a huge difference between gaining yards and winning situations. And Houston lost practically all of them. If you look only at the box score, this game looks confusing. Houston finished with 241 total yards. New England finished with 248. Houston had 16 first downs. The Patriots had 13. Time of possession? Nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing that screams massacre. And yet, the final score says Patriots 28, Texans 16. 3 field goals, 1 offensive touchdown, 1 pick six. And here is the trap. When you look only at the numbers, it feels like a close game. When you look at how those numbers were built, it feels like a game Houston never truly controlled. Because every time the Texans' offense got close to something decisive, the context turned against them. And today, the promise of this video is simple: to show why this happened repeatedly, and why this was not an accident, bad luck, or a bad day. The wrong question is, who played badly? The right question is, why did Houston spend the entire game playing in downs that expand the margin for error? Because football is not just execution, it's down and distance. It's a shortening field. It's knowing when the defense doesn't have to guess. Houston did reach the opponent's territory, but when it did, the offense entered a cycle that repeated itself all game long. Third and long. Fourth and medium. A congested red zone. And this matters because field goals are not failures. But in the playoffs, they are delayed defeats. Houston didn't lose because it couldn't move the ball. It lost because it never managed to move the ball under the right conditions. Let's break down the pattern, not the isolated play. For practically the entire game, Houston's offensive sequence followed the same invisible script. First down, run up the middle, minimal gain. Second down, short pass, incomplete or marginal gain. Third down, 6, 7, 8 yards or more, with the defense already dictating the rhythm. This is not about the offensive line not holding up. This is about play calling creating predictability. When a defense knows that third down means pass, it doesn't need to respect play action. It doesn't need to respect the run. It can attack leverage and timing. And that is exactly what New England did. Now, let's get to the moment that emotionally flips the game. The interception returned for a touchdown in the second quarter. The score was 10-7 Texans. Houston was coming off a confident drive. The game was balanced, but that play doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes from a 2nd and 7, with a deep route developing, protection with no adjustment, and a quarterback being forced to decide quickly, in a context that favors the defense. Marcus Jones didn't make a miraculous play. He made a play the context allowed. Because when you ask an offense to repeatedly operate in long yardage situations, eventually the margin for error disappears, and after that, the pattern hardens. Houston enters the red zone 3 times, leaves with 3 field goals, first and goal inside the 10-yard line, short field, compressed defense, not enough variation, no real horizontal conflict, no play that forces the defense to hesitate. This is not a lack of talent. It's a lack of structural answers when the field tightens. And in the playoffs, when the field tightens, that's exactly where games are decided. The numbers don't explain the game. They confess. Now, yes, let's get to the numbers, but not as a showcase, as proof of a thesis. Houston finished the game with 16 first downs. New England finished with 13. That looks like an advantage. But that number hides the fact that Houston rarely chained first downs in favorable situations. Because converting a first down into 1st and 10 at midfield does not carry the same structural value as converting a 3rd and 4 inside the red zone, and that's where the difference shows up. Houston converted only 1/3 of its third downs. That doesn't just mean low efficiency. It means that in 2/3 of critical situations, the offense was stopped before gaining control of the drive. And when you don't sustain drives, you don't force defensive adjustments. You don't wear down the line. You don't create conflict. You kick 3 times inside the 10-yard line. 3 field goals. Those field goals hide the fact that Houston spent the entire game playing not to make mistakes, instead of playing to create an advantage. Now, let's talk about sacks. Stroud was taken down 3 times. That number by itself doesn't scare anyone. What it hides is when those sacks happened. 3rd and long, 2nd and 12, 3rd and 6. In other words, almost all meaningful pressure came on downs where the defense already knew what was coming. This is not an offensive line being dominated snap after snap. This is an offensive line being put into situations where the defense can align, wait, and attack the weak point. And when you play predictable, even good offensive lines look bad. Now compare that to the other side. Drake May didn't have a spectacular game. He didn't need to. He threw fewer passes, had fewer yards, but converted when the game demanded conversion. New England scored touchdowns in situations where Houston accepted field goals. New England attacked in moments of structural advantage. Houston attacked in moments of survival. That is the difference between production and situational efficiency. What does this game really say about Houston? This loss does not say the Texans are a weak team. It says something more uncomfortable. It says that certain offensive choices simply do not survive in January. In the playoffs, you can't live in 3rd and long. You can't enter the red zone without answers. You can't ask your quarterback to win the game in situations where the defense holds all the cards, because teams like New England don't need to be more talented. They live off punishing predictability. And here's the most important point. This is not an unsolvable problem. Stroud has talent. The offensive roster has pieces. The defensive line showed it can win games on its own in stretches. But if Houston wants to stop being a dangerous team and become an inevitable one, it needs to stop playing playoff football as if it were still September. The playoffs are not about volume. They are about when you accelerate, when you take risks, when you force the defense to make the first mistake. And in this game, Houston never forced that. And when you revisit the game through this lens, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Houston finished the night with 5 turnovers, not as a chaotic collapse, but as a direct consequence of constantly living in situations where the mistake weighs more than the success. 4 of those losses came in the first half. 1 of them was returned to the end zone, and at that moment, the game stopped being about volume and became about structural survival. The Texans' defense did enough to keep the game alive. Forced punts, created opportunities, dominated entire stretches on 3rd down. But every time it gave the ball back, the offense returned pressure, short fields, wear and tear. And in the playoffs, that is fatal. Because it doesn't matter how many yards you produce when almost all of them come far from the decisive moment. It doesn't matter to move the ball if every critical drive ends in a field goal, sack, or turnover. This game does not condemn the roster's talent. It does not define C.J. Stroud's ceiling. It does not close the franchise's window. But it leaves a clear warning for the offseason. If Houston wants to be back here in January, it will need to stop playing the game the opposing defense expects and start building advantages before 3rd down, before the red zone, before the mistake becomes the only option. Because the playoffs don't punish those who try. They punish those who insist on the wrong pattern. And that is exactly what happened here. Thank you for watching and see you soon.